I still remember the way she looked at me that day, soft eyes scanning mine with a quiet accusation I couldn't answer. Why didn't you come for me instead? The words didn't leave her lips loudly. They barely left them at all. But the weight of them pressed into my chest as if I had somehow failed a promise I didn't even know I'd made. I was leaning against the counter at the little independent bookstore where I worked, fidgeting with the edge of a paperback, trying to keep my mind on the stacks of unsorted returns, when she walked in. The bell above the door jingled, light bouncing off her silver-streaked hair, and the air felt heavier for a second. She moved with that natural confidence that comes from decades of knowing who you are, glancing at the new arrivals before her eyes drifted toward me. She didn't smile, at least, not yet, but it felt like the room had tilted ever so slightly toward her presence. Her name is Eleanor. She's my sister's friend, though she's always felt like she belongs in a world separate from ours, like a chapter one wasn't supposed to read, but somehow had stumbled into. She has this way of being both warm and untouchable, like sunlight hitting a cold marble floor. I had noticed her before, in passing, at family gatherings, at the cafe down the street. But this was the first time I got close enough to see the small details. The way her fingers lingered on the edge of a counter when she reached for a book, the soft crease at the corner of her eyes when she studies someone quietly, the faint scent of lavender and old paper that seems to follow her even when she steps back. I cleared my throat, trying not to fumble with the pile of returns. "Hey, Eleanor." Her head tilted slightly, and her eyes, soft, searching, locked with mine. For a heartbeat, I thought she might laugh, or look away, or accuse me of something I couldn't name. Instead, she just held the gaze, and in that stillness, the room around us fell silent. I felt my heart speed up without a sound, the sort of flustered awareness that makes your stomach tighten and your hands shake just a little. "You're late," she said finally, but there wasn't any accusation in her tone, only a quiet curiosity, like she was trying to measure the distance between us with words that didn't belong. I stopped. My voice felt hollow, like it had been sucked dry. I wanted to explain, to apologize, to tell her that the world had been moving too fast, and I hadn't figured out how to catch up, but all I could do was stare back. She shifted slightly, brushing her fingers against a shelf as if that simple gesture anchored her to the ground, and for a moment, it looked like she might disappear into the aisles of books and be gone. Instead, she leaned closer, just enough for the faintest warmth of her presence to hit me, and the world, once again, seemed to hinge on her. I watched her, trying to read her thoughts in the quiet corners of her expression. Her soft eyes lingered on mine a little too long, and I realized, with a strange mix of guilt and awe, that I was caught somewhere between knowing I shouldn't feel this way and not wanting to look away. She didn't have to say anything else. I didn't need her to. That pause, that shared glance, was already too much. It burned like a memory I wasn't allowed to keep. When she finally turned to pick up a book, the tension didn't leave me. I wanted to follow, to say something, anything, but my hands stayed on the counter. And then she whispered, almost to herself, but not quite, "Why didn't you come for me instead?" Even now, hours later, I can't shake the echo of it. I keep replaying the way she said it, the weight behind it, the softness and the demand in her eyes. And I wonder, did she know how much it would haunt me? How it would make the world I thought I understood suddenly feel fragile, like glass? I found her leaning over the counter again the next afternoon, this time with a stack of invoices that seemed almost too heavy for her hands. The bookstore smelled faintly of old paper and lemon polish, the afternoon sun spilling across the floor in long stripes. I swallowed the sudden tightness in my chest and stepped forward. "Here, let me help," I said, reaching for the pile. She hesitated, a flicker of something in her expression I couldn't name, reluctance, pride, maybe a tiny shred of vulnerability. I've got it," she murmured, but her fingers wavered, brushing mine as we both touched the top envelope. The brush was brief, but enough to make my pulse spike. Her eyes darted away, scanning the shelves instead of meeting mine. She's always had this air of control, this composed, confident presence. But for a fraction of a second, I caught her off guard. The crease between her brows softened, her shoulders slumped just slightly, and she exhaled like she'd been holding it in longer than anyone should. I wanted to reach out, to ease that invisible weight, but the moment passed before I could. "You've been working too hard," I said lightly, almost joking, but hoping my voice could carry some comfort. Her lips twitched, almost a smile, but she didn't reply. Instead, she adjusted the stack, pressing her palm against the paper as if it anchored her. I noticed the faint tremor of her hand, the way her knuckles whitened around the edges of the envelopes. She's usually so precise, so deliberate. This small imperfection, the one she would never admit to anyone, made her feel achingly human. We moved through the aisles together, stacking books, cataloging returns. Every now and then, our hands brushed, accidental, fleeting, and each time, she pulled away just a little too quickly, like she was afraid the moment would linger. I wanted to ask why, to break the quiet, but I didn't. I couldn't. Her laugh came then, low and unexpected, when a book slid off the cart and clattered to the floor. It was brief, almost apologetic, and it caught me off guard, because it was real, unguarded. It didn't reach her eyes entirely, though she was still holding back something. I kept watching, memorizing the lines of her face, the way her hair caught the light, the subtle fatigue under her eyes. Finally, we paused, leaning against the counter. The air between us was thick in a way that made ordinary sounds, birds outside, the soft hum of the register, fade to background noise. She looked at me then, for just a second longer than usual, and something unsaid passed between us. I didn't move. She didn't speak. And yet, that silence felt charged, as if the space itself had bent toward us. Her hand twitched slightly as she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, and I realized I couldn't stop noticing the small, intimate gestures that belonged only to her. Then she turned, her eyes lingering just a heartbeat too long on the stack of books, and I could feel it. The gentle pull, the forbidden energy of proximity, the unspoken tension hanging between us. And I knew, without her saying a word, that this was only the beginning of something neither of us had permission to feel. The rain had started softly at first, tapping the bookstore windows in a quiet rhythm that made the room feel smaller, more intimate. I was stacking a new shipment of hardcovers near the register when Eleanor appeared in the doorway, coat dripping, hair plastered to her temples. She shook off the water like a cat, then glanced at me, and I caught that familiar, guarded look, like she was holding back a part of herself that no one was allowed to touch. "Sorry, I didn't think it would," she started, trailing off as she set her bag on the counter. Her eyes flicked to mine, and for a brief second, the storm outside didn't matter. It was just us, the quiet hum of the register, and the soft scent of damp pages. I stepped closer to hand her a towel. Our hands brushed again, longer this time, and I froze. Not because I was startled, but because the electricity of the contact left a hollow ache in my chest. She looked down at our fingers, then back at me, and I thought I saw the tiniest hesitation in her gaze, as if she was debating whether to step closer or pull away entirely. We worked side by side in silence for a while, arranging the new books. My pulse had its own rhythm, matching the storm outside, and every accidental brush of her elbow or shoulder made me aware of how close we were. I wanted to speak, to say something I wasn't sure I was allowed to, but I stayed silent, letting the tension hover, tasting it without acting. And then her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it quickly, her face tightening, and I saw the subtle shift in her expression, disappointment, perhaps even guilt. A name flashed on the screen that made my stomach knot, and I could feel the sudden, invisible barrier between us. She slid the phone face down, muttering something under her breath that I couldn't catch, and I wanted to ask, to reassure her, to tell her it was okay, but the words died in my throat. The storm outside intensified, rattling the windows, and the room felt smaller still. Eleanor leaned over the counter to reach for a book, and in that stretch, her arm brushed mine again, fingers barely grazing. My heart jumped, my body reacting faster than my mind could process. I wanted to close the gap, wanted to reach across and hold her hand, maybe even let my lips find hers. But the phone call, the unspoken rules, the careful walls she built, all held me back. She straightened, eyes briefly locking with mine, and there it was, a silent acknowledgement of everything unsaid, a question hanging between us that neither dared answer. I could almost hear my own heartbeat, loud in the quiet bookstore, counting the seconds we remained that close, so close that the air felt charged with something forbidden. Then she bent down to grab another stack of books, and I felt the tiniest exhale escape her lips, a soft sound that didn't belong to the room, to the books, to the storm. I wanted to follow the motion, to reach for her, to close that impossible space, but I stayed rooted, lips pressed tight, hands stiff at my sides. And as the thunder rolled overhead, I realized just how dangerously close we had been, and how impossible it was to act without everything unraveling. The brush of her fingers against mine lingered longer in my mind than the storm outside. The bookstore was nearly empty that evening, the orange glow of the lamps cutting the shadows in sharp lines across the floor. I was shelving some returns near the poetry section when Eleanor appeared behind me, leaning against the edge of a cart, her expression unreadable. She didn't speak at first. She never does when something heavier than words is hovering between us. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice soft, because even that little question felt too loud in the quiet. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment I thought she might look away. Instead, she didn't. She just held the gaze, and it was like staring at something fragile I wasn't supposed to touch. "I don't know," she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what we're doing, any of it." The words landed between us and hung there, weighty, impossible to ignore. I felt my chest tighten, my fingers curling around the spine of a book I wasn't paying attention to. I wanted to say something reassuring, something that would make it all make sense, but my mouth felt glued shut. She shifted closer, not touching me, just close enough that the heat from her presence seemed to draw the space between us tighter. Her hands fiddled with a bookmark, twisting it, letting it slide through her fingers. I noticed the way her shoulders sagged just slightly, the tiredness that always hides beneath her confident exterior. "I keep thinking," she continued, slow, measured, "that if we were normal, this would be simple. But we're not. And I can't." She paused, searching my face, maybe for a sign, maybe for something to anchor her. "I can't pretend this is nothing." I swallowed, my throat tight. I wanted to tell her I felt the same, wanted to confess the quiet ache that had been building since the first time our fingers brushed, but the words wouldn't come. So I just stood there, letting her voice carry, letting the silence fill the spaces between the sentences we weren't saying. She finally lowered her gaze to the books scattered on the counter, hands pressed flat against them. "I hate that I think about you like this," she whispered. "And I hate that I can't stop." I wanted to reach out, to ease the tension that was coiling between us, but even moving felt like it could shatter the fragile truth that had just been spoken. So I stayed still, my eyes tracing the line of her jaw, the slight tremor in her hands, the way she seemed to occupy the room entirely without trying. "I don't know how to not feel it," she said after a long pause, her voice breaking ever so slightly. She finally looked up, soft eyes locking with mine, and I thought I saw all her vulnerability laid bare for the first time. I opened my mouth, then closed it again, because no answer felt right. There was no comfort to offer, no tidy resolution to give. Only the raw, aching tension that made it impossible to pretend this was normal, that made the distance between us feel simultaneously too wide and impossibly close. And then she said it, the line that would haunt me for days, whispered as if confessing a sin. Maybe we should stop pretending we're okay." I had been restacking some return novels when Eleanor's hand appeared on the edge of the counter, startling me. She wasn't smiling, but there was a weight in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Slowly, almost reluctantly, she reached into her bag and pulled out a folded photograph. I found this the other day," she said quietly, placing it between us. Her fingers lingered on the edges, trembling slightly. I leaned closer, careful not to touch it, careful not to break whatever fragile boundary she was guarding. It was her, years younger, laughing with a man I didn't recognize. She looked alive in a way she rarely allowed herself now, the kind of joy that made the lines around her eyes look soft instead of worn. And beside her, a man whose hand rested lightly on her shoulder, familiar and intimate. I thought I'd moved past it, she said, eyes flicking to mine and then away again. But sometimes, I don't know, it hits me like it's yesterday. I could feel the shift immediately. The tension between us, the unspoken pull we'd been dancing around, suddenly had another layer. I swallowed hard, unsure what to say. My mind raced, not with jealousy, but with understanding, empathy, and the gnawing awareness that this was part of who she was, the part that I might never touch, never fully know. Was he important to you? I asked softly, voice careful. She nodded, biting her lip. I loved him. I thought it would last forever. And then, it didn't. Life got in the way. Or I did. Her fingers brushed the photograph again, tracing the faint lines in the image as if trying to memorize them. I wanted to tell her something. Anything. But the right words weren't coming. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, hesitating before showing her something I'd almost forgotten. A voicemail from my own past, a memory I thought I'd buried. Listen, I said, and she leaned in. My finger pressed play, and the faint voice of someone I had loved and lost filled the small space between us. Eleanor's eyes widened slightly, not in surprise, but recognition of what pain could sound like, how fragile people could be when they tried to hold themselves together. We sat there in silence, the voices of the past mingling with the storm outside the window. She swallowed hard, and I saw it. The flicker of emotion she had carefully locked away, now slipping through. It wasn't dramatic. There were no tears, only the soft, seismic tremor that comes when someone realizes life has layers they hadn't been ready to face until now. Finally, she looked at me, her expression unreadable, but softer. Maybe that's why I keep pushing at things I shouldn't, she murmured, voice low. Maybe it's not about you at all. Maybe it's about what I didn't get before. The room felt charged in a different way than it had before, less forbidden, more fragile. I nodded slowly, though I didn't know if I fully understood. Her hand hovered over the photograph again, and for a moment, it felt like she was letting me see the part of her that she never showed anyone. And then she said it, almost to herself, almost as a warning. I'm not sure I'm ready to let it go, or to let anyone in. The bookstore was nearly empty, the late afternoon sun filtering through the blinds and painting stripes across the floor. Eleanor was seated on a low stool, sorting through a stack of novels, her hands moving slowly as if each one demanded careful attention. I lingered nearby, pretending to adjust a shelf, but really just watching her, feeling the hum of something unspoken settle between us. I never meant for it to get complicated, she said softly, not looking up. Her voice trembled just enough to betray the walls she usually kept so high. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed, waiting for her eyes to meet mine. When they finally did, the guardedness had softened, replaced by something quiet and raw, an acknowledgement neither of us needed to name aloud. We've been avoiding it, I said gently, but maybe avoiding it doesn't change anything. Her lips pressed together, and for a long moment, she simply breathed, the rise and fall of her chest slow and deliberate. I took a cautious step closer, careful not to crowd, careful not to force anything, but close enough that the air around us seemed to thicken. Her hand rested on the edge of the stool, fingers brushing against the side of mine. I didn't move away. Neither did she. And in that small contact, the feather-light graze of skin against skin, everything shifted. The tension we'd carried for weeks, the longing, the hesitation, the unspoken confessions, it all settled into a quiet inevitability. I don't know if I can ever go back to before, she admitted finally, eyes dropping to her hands. I nodded, letting the words sink in. Neither can I, and maybe we don't have to. We fell into a comfortable silence then, the kind that feels heavy yet safe. It wasn't rushed, and there was no declaration, no rush of words to make it official. Just two people, sharing a space, acknowledging the truth of what had been simmering beneath the surface. She finally shifted closer, not dramatically, not with urgency, just enough that her shoulder brushed mine, a grounding presence. I could feel her warmth, steady and familiar, and it matched the strange, quiet pulse in my chest. I reached out then, slowly, placing my fingers lightly over hers. She didn't pull away. Her hand fit perfectly in mine, small, warm, and familiar. And in that touch, the months of hesitation, the longing, the near misses, the guarded walls, it all made sense. We stayed that way for a long moment, hands clasped, eyes occasionally meeting, then drifting to the floor, the books, the shafts of light, anything to break the intensity without breaking it. There was understanding there, fragile, earned, and real. Finally, she leaned her head against my shoulder, not seeking comfort, not seeking anything dramatic, just leaning, acknowledging, resting. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The world outside continued, indifferent to the quiet revolution happening in that corner of the bookstore. And as the light shifted with the late sun, brushing across her hair, across her shoulder, across our clasped hands, I realized this was enough. It was everything we had needed. Not the words, not the declarations, not the dramatic gesture, but the quiet, unforced acceptance of each other. The storm, the tension, the longing, all collapsed into this single, small, undeniable moment. It's strange how ordinary moments can carry the weight of everything that came before. I'm back in the bookstore now, months later, and nothing about the space has changed. The same stacks of books, the same quiet hum of the register, but everything feels different. Not because the world shifted, but because because we did. Eleanor is here, too, of course, moving through the aisles with that effortless grace I've memorized, the way her hands linger on the spines of novels, as if reading them also reads her. She smiles softly at me when she notices my gaze, a quiet acknowledgement of the hours, the storms, the almosts, and the moments that finally led us here. It's not a dramatic smile. It doesn't need to be. It's enough. I think about how much I've changed since those first moments. The way my chest would tighten at the brush of her hand, the sleepless nights replaying silences, the hesitation that turned into understanding. And I see how she has changed, too. The guarded lines softened, the careful walls relaxed. The tension she carried now folded into a calm certainty. Not because we forced it, not because we rushed it, but because we let it grow, quietly, honestly. Love, I've realized, isn't always fireworks or declarations. Sometimes, it's the unspoken acknowledgement of presence, the comfort in shared silences, the weightless certainty that the person next to you is choosing to be there, every day, without conditions. And sometimes, it's in the little things, her hand brushing mine as we organize books, the faint laugh she lets escape when I mispronounce a title, the way she leans into me on quiet afternoons, just enough to remind me that I'm no longer a bystander in her life. We've learned how to be close without breaking, how to speak without saying everything, how to respect the fragility of the past while letting the present unfold. And in that, there's a kind of quiet triumph, a warmth that doesn't demand attention but fills the spaces around us nonetheless. I catch her looking at me from across the room, soft eyes meeting mine, and I realize that the weight of "why didn't you come for me instead?" has transformed into a gentle understanding. We came for each other in the ways we could, in the ways we had to, and the rest will always be ours to navigate. I sit back against the counter, letting the soft golden light fall across my face, and I think about the story we've written together, one that doesn't end in grand gestures, but in something far rarer, a shared, earned peace. And in the quiet, I whispered to myself, not out of obligation, but out of awe, this feels like home. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?